President-elect Donald Trump is responding to the passing of Fidel Castro after tweeting, "Fidel Castro is dead." He followed that up a few hours later with a statement, calling Castro a brutal dictator who oppressed his own people for nearly 6 decades. Fidel Castro's legacy is one of firing squads, theft, unimaginable suffering, poverty, and the denial of fundamental human rights. Reporter for The Atlantic, Molly Ball, and reporter for The Washington Post, Ed O'Keefe, are both in Washington. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us. Ed, I want to start with you. Trump has said he could roll back President Obama's policy with Cuba. Let's listen to what he said in Miami in September.
All of the concessions that Barack Obama has granted the Castro regime were done through executive order, which means the next president can reverse them. And that I will do unless the Castro regime meets our demands. Those demands will include religious and political freedom for the Cuban people and the freeing of political prisoners.
Ed, how do you expect Trump to handle Cuba now?
Well, I think with most things regarding Donald Trump, we're just going to have to wait and see, because one week he says one thing and next he says another. But what he said there is pretty consistent with what we heard, for example, from Senator Marco Rubio this morning, saying, I don't necessarily want to reverse everything that's just been done by the Obama presidency or the Obama administration, but we've got to get the Cuban government to make some more concessions compared to what they did when the president first reopened relations with Cuba. There has been very little changed about everyday life in Cuba because of this agreement, and Republicans have said, really since the president did this, that there needs to be. So I would suspect that Trump would definitely try to seek some kind of concession from the Cuban government. Remember, there's a lot of business pressure now to keep open what's happened so far and to go further, to lift the embargo entirely. There's also a majority of Americans supporting that idea, but certainly most Republicans remain skeptical of doing so. But when you're somebody who's in the construction and lodging business, and you know that a lot of people in that industry, in those industries, want to be working in Cuba, I think Trump is going to have to be sympathetic to that and perhaps find a way to get a better deal, as he would say.
Molly, what's your take on it?
Yeah, I think Ed makes a really good point. I think also, given that so much of Trump's appeal has been as a deal maker, this will be a very early test of his ability to negotiate on a different stage than he's ever been accustomed to. Obviously, this isn't a business deal. This is a foreign policy deal. And to the extent that the Republican line, the Republican criticism of Obama, which Trump has echoed, has been that he was too eager to make deals and that he was too soft on harsh regimes like that of Cuba, that of Castro. They are going to want to get more concessions, and Trump is going to be tested to see whether he can, in fact, extract those concessions. He has indicated that his approach will be a very blunt one, that he will simply roll back what's been given. As Ed said, you know, Republicans like Rubio would rather see an exchange of sorts. They would like to see the United States tougher on Cuba, but they would like to see us get something out of it in terms of making life better for the Cuban people. The death of Castro changes the equation in a lot of ways, and so how the new administration will approach that very much remains to be seen.
All right, let's talk about the recount effort now. Ed, Trump has blasted Green Party candidate Jill Stein's effort to recount votes in 3 states, calling it a scam. Trump has also been tweeting up a storm against Clinton after her campaign said it would back Stein's efforts in an attempted recount. So what do you make of this recount attempt?
Well, look, there's no reason to believe, there's no evidence, at least so far, that a recount would change the results in any dramatic way, that would reverse it and give one of the states to Hillary Clinton. But it seems that Jill Stein was able to find enough support and enough monetary support, frankly, to force one in Wisconsin. So the Clinton folks, without really lifting a finger, said, okay, well, we'll support that. We'll send our lawyers to keep an eye on things. But it's not Hillary Clinton's request for this recount. I think part of this, frankly, for Democrats is cathartic. They suffered a bit of a death, if you will, a political death 3 weeks ago, and this perhaps is an autopsy to prove why it is it happened and to what extent it happened. I think also, though, whether they want it to be this way or not, this may actually do Donald Trump a favor, because it may assuage the doubts of a lot of people that question whether or not the election was rigged, whether the Russians had something to do with it, whether the data was manipulated in any way, and prove that, in fact, no, he won. and allow him to begin his presidency in January with a very clear understanding that at least in 1, 2, maybe 3 states where it was closer than anticipated, he was indeed elected president. He has the right and the victory to govern, and it would allow him to move forward. The fact that he's going after them the way he is today isn't surprising. That's what he's done in the past. But we'll see how he comports himself as the recount begins. I think that may be more critical.
Molly, do you think Trump needs to respond to this?
Well, no, but as Ed said, he can't resist taking the bait, and you can understand why this gets his goat. I mean, the Clinton campaign was in full pearl-clutching, fainting couch mode when Trump suggested that he might not immediately accept the results of the election because he suspected it might be rigged against him. So to see the shoe on the other foot is a bit rich, and I think for him, he couldn't resist weighing in on that and noting the incredible irony of, you know, his attempt to claim that the election might be rigged was what met with so much derision, so much criticism, and to now have a lot of it's mostly grassroots on the left, right? That's where the money is coming from for Jill Stein. As Ed mentioned, there's a lot of anguish among Democratic partisans who don't want to accept the results of the election, and that's what's funding Jill Stein. The Clinton campaign's involvement is, as you said, quite minimal, but I think it's quite understandable that Trump would see an incredible irony here in the way the situation's been reversed from what people expected during that third debate, when he said he would only accept the election if he won.
Let's talk about the transition a little bit more. As the president-elect continues to fill his cabinet, Trump campaign manager Kellyanne Conway said people feel betrayed to think that Governor Romney, who went out of his way to question the character of Donald Trump, would be given Secretary of State. So what do you make of her saying this publicly, Ed?
I think it reflects what I've seen in my Twitter feed and my Facebook feeds, as she has said, that there's a lot of Trump supporters out there who can't understand why exactly he would consider somebody who was so critical of his candidacy and raised doubts about his intelligence and his motives and everything else. Look, Trump has a flair for the dramatic. He may see this as an opportunity to really extend an olive branch to a part of the Republican Party that did not like him or his candidacy, does not like him still, no matter what they tell you, and may see this as a way to send a message to the world that he can be a forgiving figure. But we've never quite seen a senior aide, as she is to the transition, use Sunday morning talk shows in her Twitter feed to channel her frustrations and the frustrations of Mitt Romney's critics to the president-elect. That's a bit out of the ordinary.
Molly, before we go,
but this was a pattern that we saw throughout the campaign, where aides to Trump knew that anything said in a private conversation might or might not be heeded because Trump has a way of telling people what they want to hear in the moment and then discarding it in favor of who else he talked to next. Trump's aides, including and perhaps most prominently Kellyanne Conway, are accustomed to giving him this kind of public advice because they know he watches television, they know he takes seriously the things that are said in public that affect the news stories about him, and it's often a more effective way of getting him to listen. So I think her public lobbying effort suggests that she is first highly alarmed by this potential appointment, but second, is not convinced that her private entreaties are getting through.
As John Dickerson said, it is all fascinating to watch. So Molly Ball and Ed O'Keefe in Washington, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Take care, Meg.